Perfect. So, good morning. I haven't bothered to venture out this morning, though the shul parking lot is being plowed as we speak. So that'll all be taken care of. And happy Hanukkah. We get to launch right in on this 7th day of Hanukkah. Did you get what you wanted?
Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning.
Thank you.
Well, you're welcome. We get to launch. I think we get to launch right in. The bracha for Torah study is Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu v'tzivanu v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
Amen.
By the way, since it is Hanukkah and we are reading the Book of Ruth, which is associated with Shavuot, one might note, though maybe you're not the kind of person who notes this, that normally there's a special biblical book that's read on holidays, right? Almost every holiday. If Ruth is done on Shavuot and Song of Songs on Pesach and Kohelet on Sukkot and Yonah on Yom Kippur and Eicha on Tisha B'Av and Esther on Purim, Hanukkah doesn't have that. And Hanukkah was noted for not having that. So there are communities around the world that had a Megillat Hanukkah that the story of the Maccabees, like sort of a reworked version from the Book of Maccabees would be read out in shul, and it's hard to find anymore. But the old Birnbaum Siddur, if any of you went to sort of like a conservadox or liberal Orthodox synagogue at some point in time, the old Birnbaum Siddur has it in it. And it's one of the few places you can sort of like comparatively easily track down the English translation of it. But there were synagogues that had a special book, as it were, read on the Shabbat of Hanukkah, though it's not a common practice anywhere anymore, to my knowledge, but it used to happen.
Rabbi?
Yep.
What is it called in the Birnbaum book? What is it called? Is it called the Birnbaum book? The book for Hanukkah. What is it called? The Hanukkah book, or is it called the Maccabees?
No, this is one of the punchlines. This is first in 5 years of doing this is the first time I've done it from home, I think. But I didn't feel like putting on boots. It might be.
I just want to know, can I find it? If I have the Birnbaum book, will I be able to find it, or is it?
If you have it, you can totally find it in the table of
okay,
contents.
that's all.
Right. So I can't remember if it's Megillat Antiochus or Megillat Chanukah or something like that, but it's totally easily identifiable. And I found it just by sort of I read a reference to it. And I'm like, does that appear anywhere? And I started looking through books that might have it. But it's not uncommon for people of a certain age to have a copy of the Birnbaum Siddur in their home. It was a common book, and if you look at the table of contents, like it's there and identifiable, like it was leave out or Matzityahu or whatever. But yeah, it's just sort of a glorified telling of the story.
I found
but people aren't, in my experience, people aren't crying out for more biblical books read.
Excuse me, Rabbi. It's called the Scroll of the Hashmonoim. It's on page 714 in the Birnbaum Siddur. It's not called the book.
Harris was a top candidate of people who would have it like nearby. Yes, yeah. So Hashmonaim, right? The Hasmoneans is the ancestral house of Judah and the gang. So colloquially they'll call it Maccabees, but when one refers to like the royal house, the Hasmoneans. There you are. That's our sort of like, and that's a sort of representative of Jewish life that some traditions like stick and others don't. This, because it sort of was like addressing a need that wasn't exactly there, seems to have faded from common use. Not just in the conservative world, but in the Orthodox world as well. Like, it's telling that it's in the Birnbaum and not, say, in the Art Scroll. And the Art Scroll like makes an effort to be totally complete, but it leaves this out because they thought they could be totally complete by leaving out the Hanukkah reader. Anyway, there's nothing so earth-shattering in it. We get to start out. The bracha for Torah study is Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kidshanu v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Though I can't leave the subject entirely. It's one of the odd things, right? The Hanukkah story, like part of the reason why it might have made its way into some Sidurim is that there's no telling, like, again, famously, it's not in the books that you're likely to have in your hands because it's not in a Jewish Bible, but only in a Christian Bible. So it's a effort to like have the story appear somewhere.
Rabbi?
Yep.
Can I ask you a question? So the Book of Ruth and the Book of Esther, these are the only two books, biblical books named after women?
Absolutely.
So is it possible in the case of Ruth that this is primarily, or at least partly, because she's the great-grandmother of David? Can't hear?
Yeah, no. It faded out as soon as you started to ask, which is say, is it possible that in the case of Ruth, it faded out for me?
Oh, that is possible in the case of Ruth that it's because she's the great-grandmother of David, at least in part?
Yes. It's not quite clear, like what's what's the point of this book, because it doesn't, like, it's not many of the biblical books are, there are either commands or there's a war or there's a something going on. This obviously is very different. It's just like the story of this woman or of this pair of women. So it may well be that it is about tracing the lineage of King David. Though again, even that sort of it's odd, like why that would be like so super necessary, or why it couldn't be just sort of like dispatched in a couple of lines in the Book of Samuel. But yeah, so it might be that, because it doesn't tell of any sort of like grand miracles or anything. No seas split, right? This isn't some grand deliverance like in the Book of Esther, and it's not a incredible miracle, but it's rather it's a rather quaint story. So it could just be that it's about David.
Over the years, I've heard a weird from the Medrash. First of all, somehow that they say that Goliath was Oprah's grandson, and so David and David and Goliath were related. And also, I also read something once that Oprah might have been from the Egyptian princess Palestine, from Egypt. So it's like I've heard all kinds of strange stories over the years.
Yes. So if the Chazal, like the sages at various points in history, hate anonymity. So everyone everywhere will the Midrash contains many different stories, many of which are mutually exclusive and to each other, and many of which contradict each other, and they're not supposed to be like sort of like literally believed, but yeah, so you can find midrashim claiming some relatively wild things. There many of them don't sort of like gain currency, like some sort of work and some sort of don't, and like they're not so like when you encounter something like that, it's more in the line of a story or an insight and not sort of part of traditional belief or traditional understanding of the story. But yeah, you can find most anything because they want to. Yeah.
Rabbi,
Yep.
what about the Book of Judith? But that's in the Apocrypha.
Yep. Not doesn't make
Wasn't canonized.
correct. Not canonized. Doesn't make the cut into Jewish Bibles. The only apocryphal book that seems to have been close to making it in, quote unquote, is the Book of Ben Sira, which is a lot like Proverbs. And the rabbis of the Talmud quote from it a couple of times. So they clearly were aware of it, and it sort of just like, again, ended up on the cutting room floor. But that one seems to have been, the fact that they're quoting it makes it indicate that they knew it, and it may have been under consideration. But ultimately, it doesn't make it in.
Those of us, I guess, who are in Rabbi's Cece's class, we studied the Book of Judith, and she talked about that some synagogues say a 70 stanza piyut for Hanukkah about Judith. Even today, I can't imagine us doing a 70 stanza anything.
Right. You know what? I feel like that there may be a place to save those things. It probably isn't like in the middle of davening, because davening sort of seems to be long enough for the people who show up for davening, and all the more so for the people who don't. But things like that, they can be hunted down and like be done as a as a class or as a Shabbat afternoon session or things like that. But there you are. I'm not aware of the 70 stanza piyut. But obviously it's parallel to things like what I referenced earlier, the Megillat Hashmonaim, in that different customs pop up in different places. I'd be happy to see it. There we are. All right. Back to the text. The bracha for Torah study is Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech asher k'tzanu mitzvotav v'tzivanu asok b'divrei Torah.
Rabbi, you're getting to be like us. This is the third time you're saying the bracha.
Oh, did I? There you are.
You're working with the old folks too much, Rabbi. I don't want to say anything. I'm going on mute.
I had coffee. I was wondering if I should have more. Page 72 then. I'm getting right to it so that I don't say it a fourth time, because the second two are brachas levatala. You're not supposed to say a blessing when you aren't going to fulfill the mitzvah. Chapter 3. This is, of course, like we last left, like she, Ruth had like gone out to find food, went to Boaz's field. He was food. She comes back to Naomi. Naomi is like, oh, this is great. You met Boaz. He's your redeeming kinsman, which seems to be a version of this the system of Yibum, of the in the Torah, it's the deceased brother marrying the childless widow. And what we'll see here in the Book of Ruth is that it's a close relative, not necessarily the brother. So, chapter 3. And Naomi, her mother-in-law, said to her, "My daughter, shall I not seek for you a settled place for you, that it will be well for you?" And so this is Naomi, sort of like the two of them are sitting around, presumably in the apartment or whatever, and Naomi realizes that she's here with me. I may be enjoying the company, and I'm not her mother, but it probably is my responsibility to seek for her a marriage. That's how my daughter-in-law will be best served. Verse 2. And now is not Boaz our kinsman, with whose young women you are winnowing barley at the threshing floor tonight. And you must bathe and anoint yourself and put on your garments and go down to the threshing floor. Do not let yourself be known to the man until he has finished eating and drinking. And it will be, when he lies down, that you will know the place where he lies down. He shall come and uncover his feet and lie down. And as for him, he shall tell you what to do. And she said to her, whatever you say to me, I will do. We'll pause there for a moment. So what's going on here? This is a bit of a strange moment. I mean, most of chapter 3 is relatively strange. So step by step. 1, Naomi notes, Ruth, we've got to get you married. That's how you're going to be secure in this society, right? You can, as a it's one thing for me as an old widow to try and make my life work, Naomi seems to be saying, but you as a young widow, like this isn't going to work out for you. Let's find you a husband. And then the verse 2 is, Boaz is our candidate, which is to say, whereas in the Torah, the brother of the deceased is obligated to marry his childless sister-in-law and to raise the progeny as his brother's son. Here, it seems the system is that it just goes to the next relative who can marry, as opposed to the Torah system of the brother has to. Here, it's the relative can. So she says that Boaz, you met Boaz, he's the redeeming kinsman. And so verse 3 is, go primp yourself, get yourself ready, bathe, and anoint yourself, and put on your garments, and go down to the threshing floor. So now the rabbis want to keep this somewhat clean. So this is like when they say wash off, like the Rashi literally is like, go to the mikvah. And like essentially sort of like there's a complete your conversion aspect to it. You already like sort of like committed to being in the Jewish people, but now you have to like go to the mikvah. That's the bathe to Rashi, or at the very least, you've been in the field recently. So clean yourself up. Put on, Rashi also says, when it says put on your garments, Rashi also literally says, put on your Shabbos clothes. So Ruth puts on her Shabbos clothes. Dress yourself up. And go down to the threshing floor. But don't let him know that you're there. After he's done with dinner, eating and drinking. And then look at verse 4. When he lies down, figure out where he is. And he's then asleep, right? So he eats, he drinks, he goes and lies down, and then the implication is, and falls asleep. And then when he falls asleep, there's a middle of verse 4. Ruth, you sneak in your, sort of like all cleaned up and in your decent clothes, uncover his feet and lie down at his feet, which seems to be like, as it were, like on the floor. She's supposed to curl up and lie down. So a few things here. The lying down at uncover his feet seems to be some version of, it's not, again, this is with the Midrashim, there's lots of possibilities here. Most likely scenario is, it means literally, has dinner, he goes to bed. You're supposed to go and she's supposed to go and literally take the blankets off his feet, which would, I think what's going on is that he'll wake up in the middle of the night because his feet are cold. He'll wake up in the middle of the night and he'll look down. He'll like sort of sit up and look down at his feet and he'll see Ruth there. And then what will ensue will ensue. So there's a few things. What will happen, spoiler alert, is that they'll talk. It's not quite clear if Naomi's game is he'll wake up in the middle of the night, he'll look down and see you there, he'll take you into his bed, and you will consummate the relationship, and then he'll be de facto married to you. That could be the goal, though not necessarily. There's some commentators, even classical commentators, that think uncover his feet is a sexual reference, that it's not his feet that she's uncovering. That, as Robert Alter indicates, is probably less likely because it's that's a little too forward. This whole scene is a little more forward than one would expect, but uncovering his private parts would be even more forward, though it's not like totally unreasonable. Certainly in Mishnaic Hebrew, also even in the Siddur, I can't remember if it's in Sim Shalom or Lev Shalom, but it's certainly in Archbold and in Orthodox Siddurim. There's a in one of the texts that's inserted just before Aleinu, they talk about the incense that's offered in the temple is supposed to be, and there's supposed to be a pungent odor to it, and they talk about what they would use for it, and they say that urine is pungent enough, but they don't use it in the temple out of respect, and the word for urine that is used in the Mishnah is me reglayim, leg water. And there, reglayim is a feet, is a substitute for private parts. So some say that here it is as well when she says uncover his feet, but probably not. Could be, but probably not.
Rabbi?
But, yep.
For Rashi, in the Jewish Study Bible, Rashi says that Ruth did it in the opposite order of that she went to the threshing floor first, then dressed up because they didn't want to accuse her of being a harlot.
Right. So that's part of this whole thing is she's sneaking, like there's definitely, like even if, like, again, I don't think she's so aggressive here, but she's definitely doing something that is, that's forward. She is alone as a young, unattached woman sneaking in to a man's bedroom and spending the night with him.
Rabbi?
There's no way, yeah, so.
Rabbi, also the threshing floor was a place where the prostitutes went. And I think it was Hosea that ranted against Israel for acting like harlots on the threshing floor.
Right. It's sort of like it's a potential meeting place, like a third space, right? That people could have assignations in. Yeah. So Naomi's goal, of course, is to get Ruth married, and Ruth's goal is to get married. So it's possible that this strategy is a forward one. Even in the Mishnah, many years later, like the rabbis will say, there are three ways to affect a marriage. Kesav, star, and bia, right? The money, a contract, or intercourse, right? And even to this, and the rabbis will say, like you shouldn't affect a marriage through intercourse because it's just sort of it's vulgar, but we still, like a modern ceremony, like has elements of all three, which is kesev, something of value. That's the wedding ring, right? Exactly. The shtar, the contract, is of course the ketubah, and be it intercourse isn't done like during the ceremony, but there's yichud, where the couple runs off to a room alone together, and that is, well, if they're alone in a room together, we can assume, right? So it's that. So she might be. So again, like this whole thing of being alone with a man in a place where it's known such things happen is has a presumption of consummation of the relationship. which is why, like, sort of what follows in this story is telling and significant. But so she doesn't want, it doesn't seem that she wants to prostitute, that Naomi wants Ruth to prostitute herself out or anything like that. But there is a realization that if he's the redeeming kinsman, meaning that he's next in line to marry her, and if they spend the night together in a sexual sense, that then they're married. And Ruth's taken care of for life.
Rabbi,
yeah.
Is this a place where he often slept next to the grain pile on the threshing floor, or was there something different that tonight after eating and drinking, he happened to go to the grain pile on the threshing floor to sleep?
That I don't know. I mean, I'd read ahead, but I didn't bring home all the different books in question. So I'm not sure. Certainly when we first met him, he was sleeping in town and not here, it seems. So maybe this is unique to the harvest time, but
I thought all the harvest had already been brought in.
Yeah. So I don't have, so I can't answer, I can't give more detail on the question.
The Rashi note says he's doing it because he's protecting the grain from thievery, which apparently was ransom.
So there's
Rabbi?
Sir.
There's a note in Art Scroll.
Rakasha.
The sages understood Ruth's conduct as being fully for the sake of heaven. Two women, Tamar and Ruth, sacrificed themselves for the sake of the tribe of Judah. Naomi decided that the best course of action, however daring and unconventional, was for Ruth herself to approach Boaz under the most intimate circumstances and remind him of his responsibility to his uncle's family. Then, convinced of her sincerity, his compassion for her bitter plight might be evoked.
So that's a great comment, in that it's sort of like it gives like a real sense of what's going on. What will happen is something that is in no way untoward, but obviously Ruth going and spending the night alone with a man, specifically after like sort of like washing up and like getting dressed up special for the occasion and sneaking in, I mean, isn't exactly something that they want to, you know, become the common practice of nice Jewish girls, as it were, right? Like it's there's no way around the as Alder notes, the erotic implications of the scene, but it plays out cleanly. And like, is she sacrificing herself for the tribe of Judah? I mean, that's sort of like, that's definitely a pious read, but she's definitely taking a risk with her reputation and her standing for the sake of getting married, and gambling that Boaz will treat her well, which is to say, not take advantage and then deny. And she has reason to do that because she already met Boaz, and he came off as such a mensch that it's sort of like a gamble worth taking that she might not want to do, you know, with somebody who she has no connection to or who she doesn't know. So there's definitely, again, it'll play out cleanly, but it's definitely a racy scene.
Rabbi, I have issues with this because I find, and in my mind, I find that Naomi is whoring her out, and it bothers me because first she's not talking to her, then she talks to her when she needs to talk to her, Naomi, and now she's making her, quote unquote, getting dressed, bathing, and going over to lay with him.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, look.
Rabbi, maybe a counter to that, I understand Helene's feeling. Maybe a counter to that is, supposing Ruth didn't want to do any of this. Listen, I was married, I'm a widow, that's my fate. I don't want to remarry, I don't want to have kids. What status would she have in the community as a widow in that position?
Well, so I mean, to each point, like for reverse order, like I mean, she could spend her life doing what she just did, which is to say, she can spend the rest of her life gleaning, right? Like if she has no other means of support, like there's no there's no statute of limitations on the gleaning. Like you get to do it. So she would have a comparatively precarious existence, but she could certainly survive. Like the system is set up to support widows and foreigners and the poor. She's all three. So she could say that. Naomi, is she whoring her out? Like sort of as I said at the outset, like she could be accused of that, but that's unlikely her goal. It's more likely that she anticipates Boaz acting the way Boaz will in fact act, partly based on her previous knowledge of Boaz, partly based on Ruth's, if you remember from last week, Ruth's experience of Boaz, which is where that is, he's essentially a mensch. So he, so she is definitely putting Ruth at a certain level of risk. She thinks it's worthwhile. Not in like if you want to be charitable to Naomi, not in the whoring her out sense, but in the this is the risk that is most beneficial to Ruth sense.
So I have a question for you. So why didn't Naomi just in the daytime go and speak to Boaz and say, you're a redeeming kinsman. I'd like you to redeem Ruth. She is, she would like that, or
I know.
It seems very strange to me.
Right. That's the thing. It seems it's weird in that, like, if that's because, and by the way, we'll get to chapter 4, like everything will, like things will take place in the open. But it does feel like some sort of entrapment. Like again, like why all this subterfuge? There's no reasonable society where where contracts are made with a man and a woman in a room alone in the middle of the night. Like that's not the way marriages are or agreements are supposed to be struck. So exactly, I think that's a good it's a good point. It is not entirely clear unless she thinks, I think that Naomi thinks, and Ruth apparently agrees, that the way to impress upon Boaz the importance of his obligation and like trying to get him to follow through on the obligation is to give a sense of how much Ruth needs this, and Ruth putting herself like in this compromising situation communicates, look, I'm out of options here, please help me. That's one possibility. Or you could of course say, and this might be a little bit more in line with Helene's suggestion, which is that or maybe he sees her in the middle of the night and is turned on by the sight, and then even though he's willing to sort of like hold it in for the moment, will be like, you know what, I think I really want to marry her. I would like legitimate access, as it were. So but you're right, it should be, you would want it to be the case that he just could that she could just like show up to him and knock on the door and say that, hey, you're the redeeming kinsman, my daughter-in-law's here. Wild.
Rabbi? It seems that this was engineered. In other words, I don't think it was a coincidence that she wound up in Boaz's field. And to Helene's point, which is very valid point, but in today's society, in today's mores, I think we're judging her by today's mores instead of what the customs were in those days. She was desperate. This was two ladies who were desperate, and this was an angle they played.
Rabbi?
So I mean, it could be like each view like can be well argued.
Biblically, Rabbi froze.
Rabbi
You all
Frost.
froze. Yeah. Rabbi? Rabbi?
Yeah. Go ahead, Linda.
I agree with Bob. I kind of felt the same way that women then had no agency whatsoever, and this theme of women having to resort to being a seductress is very biblical. My goodness, did the rabbi fall off here? Oh, there he is. Yeah, okay. So, so in any event, if you look at two things in the Bible, first of all, right from Adam and Eve, the woman has had to use her womanly wiles according to the way the story was written. In other words, Adam did not have to eat that apple. He had a choice not to eat the apple. He ate the apple. So much for blaming women. Second of all, Tamar tried to follow the contract, right? So she married the first guy. She married the first son. He died. Then she married the second son because she was childless. He died. And then I forget his name. Judah? Was it Judah? Yeah. So then Judah refused her rights as opposed to the contract. And then she ended up using her feminine wiles to get what she needed to get. You're muted, Rabbi.
And playing on his, as it were, masculine weakness.
Yes.
Yes. So not the first time it is, and it could be that like, so to continue to like sort of like play out the scenario, like why are they doing this? Like Naomi could be thinking, once he met you and found out you were connected to me, Ruth, once Boaz found out who you were, he knows he's a redeeming kinsman. He knows that. He should have just said, oh, you're Ruth? I'm your redeeming kinsman. We're supposed to get married. Like, he should have, like, Naomi should be thinking, he knows that. How can we remind him that he is, in fact, in line to marry you? Why don't you show up in his room in the middle of the night?
And Rabbi?
Yeah.
Particularly because you said you must bathe and anoint yourself. And that's seduction. It's just like what Esther did with Ahasuerus. It's the same thing.
Yep. Yes. So, fascinating. And again, like part of, just to like sort of highlight, like part of what's obvious is what's exciting about this in a sense is that, again, the text of the tradition isn't as pious as maybe we would like it to be, or maybe as some claim it to be. It is, it's easy to have issues with it. It's just not, things aren't always clean. So, yeah. All right, so.
Rabbi?
Yes, last comment, then we're moving on. Ed.
Okay. About, is Naomi looking out for Ruth or looking out for Naomi in pushing her daughter-in-law to marry, so that if she does marry Boaz, Naomi's future is secured as well as Ruth's? So
right, Naomi gets a grandson, which she doesn't have. Right. So it's hard to say because their fates are tied together. Naomi's only hope for a better life rests in Ruth getting married. But you can reasonably say that Ruth's only hope for a better life is in Ruth getting married. And the one who knows the system in Judah is Naomi. And the one who has the connections in Judah is Naomi. So Ruth would have a hard time doing all this on her own because she doesn't know the culture or the players as well as Naomi does. So it almost depends on what our opinion of Naomi is. And we could think well of her, or we could take the skeptical view, which is, what sort of I was suggesting, with the speech, with Naomi's speech at the end of chapter 1, like the whole, like, I came home empty talk is, and the silence after the big, where you will lodge, I will lodge speech is, can suggest a coldness to Naomi. So if you want to read her coldly, you can go with your suggestion, which is she's looking out for number one. Or you could read her gently. You could even say that she changed over the course of her time with Ruth, that they've been hanging out for the last few months or whatever. You can go either way with it. In any event, verse 5. And she said to her, meaning that Ruth said to Naomi, whatever you say to me, I will do. And she went down to the threshing floor and did all that her mother-in-law charged her. Verse 7, and Boaz ate and drank, and he was of good cheer. And he came and lay down at the edge of the stack of barley. Rashi, by the way, why was he of good cheer? Boaz had dessert. And then he had dessert, and then he studied Torah, as Boaz was wont to do. So that's why he was of good cheer. And he came and lay down at the edge of the stack of barley. And she came stealthily and uncovered his feet and lay down. And it happened at midnight that the men trembled and twisted round, and look, a woman was lying at his feet. So again, she sneaks into the room and uncovers his feet. And again, we'll read that sort of in a literal sense. And in time, that causes him to wake up, and he sort of like twists and turns and gets up, and he looks down at his uncovered feet, and there's a woman lying there. I sort of envision that she's on the floor rather than at the foot of his bed, but it seems clear that there's no implication that she's not sliding in bed next to him. Like, if you really wanted to be aggressive about this, of course, you would slide in bed next to him. She's not. She's very clearly not. And he said, Vayomer, mi'at, who are you? So again, it's dark. There's no, he doesn't have an LED nightlight. He doesn't know who it is. V'tomer anochi Ruth, amatecha, freshta kanfecha, amitecha, ki goelata. She says, he said, who are you? And she said, I am Ruth, your servant. But you spread your wing over your servant, for you are a redeeming kinsman. Kanaf, spread your wing. Now, she is there. It's a loaded phrase. Kanaf is a wing. We often will say that the phrase that we use for converts is that they're coming al tachat kanfei shechina, under the wing, the protective wings of the shechina, of the divine presence. Last chapter, when Boaz first met Ruth, he says, "You've come. May you be protected under the kanfei Hashem. May you be protected under the wings of the Lord." Right, like this is the image of a mother bird protecting her young with wings. That's the image of God protecting the people of Israel. So he says, you should be wings. She says back to him, spread your wing over your servant. But kanaf is also a garment, a corner of a garment, like we say, arba kanfot, the corners. The corners of one's garment that one puts tzitzit on. So she throws back at her, but it's sense of protect me, for you are a redeeming kinsman. She says, Ki goel ata. You are not as in the Torah, the redeeming kinsman. In the Torah system, it would have been there's somebody who's obligated, the next oldest brother, the oldest remaining brother. Here, it seems that he is a redeeming kinsman, meaning he's one of the people who can exercise their option, as it were, on Ruth, so to speak. And he said, this goes back to her, Ve'omer, Brucha at, Ladonai biti, Heitiv astecha, V'achron min harishon, Vilti lecher achrei bachrim, imdal imashir. He says to her, JPS says exclaimed, he said, you are, blessed are you to the Lord, Adonai, my daughter. You have done better in your latest kindness than in the first, not going after the young men, whether poor or rich. And now, my daughter, do not be afraid. Whatever you say, I will do for you. For all my people's town knows that you are a worthy woman. And now, though in fact I am redeeming kin, there is also a redeeming kin closer than I. Spend the night here, and it shall be in the morning. Should he redeem you, he will do well to redeem. And if he does not want to redeem you, I myself will redeem you, as the Lord lives. Lie here till morning. And he lay at his feet till morning, and it rose before a man could recognize his fellow man. Pause here for a moment. So, what's his response? His response, the important thing, by the way, is of the whole thing, to like apropos of like much of this conversation, his response is nothing sexual. His response is purely legal. He does not take advantage of this situation, right? She is there and primped, and they're alone, and it's the middle of the night, and his first words, understandably, are mi'at, who are you? And his next words are Brucha at la Hashem, biti, blessed are you to God, my daughter, right? So he is indeed the mensch that Ruth and Naomi suspected him of being, and he doesn't take advantage of the situation. His first thing out of his mouth is literally Baruch Hashem. And complimenting her. He says to her, you are blessed to the Lord, my daughter, meaning like a protective, kind reference, rather than a sexual one. He says, you've done better in your latest kindness than the first, which is to say, it's smart of you, even though you're a free agent, as it were, not to go after the young men, but to seek my protection, because I'm the one who can really take care of you, is the implication, meaning, it seems meaning that it'd be understandable if you went after one of the younger men, but religiously, I'm among your redeemers, so you're supposed to go after one of your redeemers first. So you're doing the right thing by being here. Don't be afraid. Again, that seems to be I'm not taking advantage of the situation. Neither you nor your reputation are at risk. Whatever you say, I will do for you, meaning, you're right, redemption, I'll do it. For all my people's town knows that you're a worthy woman. Again, everyone knows that, everyone knows that you have been acting on the up and up, that you're not, that you don't act in an improper manner, parentheses, even though you're a Moabite, or even though you have opportunity to, either one. And now, though, in fact, I am a redeeming kin, there's also redeeming kin closer than I, which is to say that apparently in this system, there are, whatever your next closest relative is, that's the next man up who's supposed to marry you. Boaz is like, look, I know, but there's somebody else who's ahead of me in line. So, by the way, this helps explain why Boaz didn't exercise his option earlier when he first met her. He's not first in line. He says there's somebody else who's first in line. He says, spend the night here, meaning like the spend the night here, again, doesn't have a sexual connotation to it, as it would in most any other situation, because as we'll see, it's more protection, right? Like, don't go wandering around at night. You're still a single woman. You're not going to go like walking home in the middle of the night. That's not okay. And in the morning, should he redeem you, he'll do well to redeem, meaning that there's somebody else who can do this. If he wants to do it, that's his right, and that's fine. But if he doesn't want to, then the obligation falls to me, and I'll do it. All right. So he sort of like lays out the thing. He says, but I myself redeem you as the Lord lives. That's an oath. He's setting God. It's an oath to God that he'll do it. Stay here till morning. Again, not next to him, it seems, but like where she was, at the foot of the bed. And she lay at his feet until morning and arose before a man could recognize his fellow man. This is the classic, like she's walking out before, at first light, before dawn. Before anyone can, before there's enough light for people to be up and around and to recognize it, but just enough light that sort of like, just as dawn breaks and there's a little bit of light so that the total blackness of night is broken, that. She's getting up and sneaking out. So no one will know she spent the night there. She won't be impugned with her reputation. Boaz won't be impugned with his reputation. So enough light to sneak out, but not enough light for people to already be going out. 14. And he said, let it not be known that a woman came to the threshing floor. Like that sort of like preserve your reputation, sneak out before anyone can see, even though we have nothing to be ashamed of. He said, give me the shawl that you have and hold it out. And she held it out and measured out 6 shares of barley, and he set it on her, and she came to the town. She came to her mother-in-law, and her mother-in-law said, how is it with you, my daughter? And she told her all that the man had done for her, and she said, these 6 shares of barley he gave me, for he said, you shall not come empty-handed to your mother-in-law. And she said, stay, my daughter, till you know how the matter will fall out, for the man will not rest if he does not settle the matter today. Which is, so he gives her food, as a commitment and take care of her. She goes back, sneaks back in. Naomi asks for the summary and gets it. That says that it will, he will take care of the rest of everything. Like, so so this is like this, it is a super odd scene because it has a sexual charge without anything actually happening. And it plays out perfectly for Ruth and Naomi and Boaz. They get what they want, which is an agreement for redemption, no matter what. And Ruth didn't have to actually, to Helene's point, she didn't have to actually whore herself out for it. It was okay. That now we're gonna have to. That's all chapter 3, all in 1 week. Whew. Next week, let's do because I want to be able to finish this before the year ends. So next Thursday, I think I won't have the evening class next Thursday because I think it's December 24th, and my mind will have switched off by the evening. But let's do, unless there are objections, we'll do the morning class. We'll do this next week so that we finish chapter 4 before the end of the calendar year. And that way it'll sort of like be a logical cutoff. And I will look for this question of like, why aren't they doing this in the open? Like, how could it be that the system is that you sneak into some guy's room at night and hope that he's a mensch? Like, I'll check for a response on that.
But Rabbi, who is the other man who's ahead of Boaz? I missed that.
He'll appear and he'll turn down his option in in the next chapter. It just seems to be that Boaz is like a cousin, and there's another cousin who's slightly closer, presumably to Elimelech, Ruth's deceased, or Naomi's deceased husband. There seems to be another cousin who's closer. So he could redeem, but he'll choose not to, right? He'll turn down his option. Obviously, it's all very, not all that lovely to think of the woman as an option, as an object who's in control of the men in this world. Though obviously that's the society, and that's part of the point of the story, is that Boaz is handling the situation comparatively well, even though obviously he has all the power and she has none of it. All right, Ad Khan. Take care of yourselves and make.
Yes.
Thank you. Happy Hanukkah.
Happy